Welcome to the show about all things making music, from the creative process and workflow to gear and recording techniques. I'm your host, Brian Funk, musician, producer, Ableton certified trainer, and author of the 5-Minute Music Producer. Let's learn to become better music makers. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. Today I'm speaking with musician, producer, and plugin designer Aqeel Aadam. Aqeel runs Aqeel Aadam Sound, where he makes plugins for the curious and open-minded. His latest plugin is Waymaker, a complex sequencer that lets you chart your way through melodic wilderness. Aqeel and I spoke about his musical background and his love for modular synths. He discussed how he gets his inspiration for his plugins and how he brings them to life. Please welcome Aqeel Aadam to the Music Production Podcast. All right. Aqeel, welcome to the Music Production Podcast. Good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to get to know you, get to know your work, to meet you. And it's kind of cool when it's through a mutual contact. And that was TJ, aka Six Missing, who is probably going to be the next episode that gets released, actually. And
oh, awesome.
I don't know if there might be one in between when this finally happens. But yeah, it was cool to, hear him say like, hey, you should check this stuff out. And he was right. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, TJ is a great guy. And, it's like as soon as he releases something, I'm streaming it immediately. So yeah, he's always doing really quality stuff.
Yeah, I always have a need for kind of like relaxing playlists and sounds and albums and just stuff that I don't want to say that I just let fade into the background. I mean, sometimes, yeah, but just something to kind of slow myself down. And his stuff fits that perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I'm working, like, there's always different moods to kind of reach for. But most of the time, I feel like I need relaxing stuff to kind of keep me from getting too frustrated or just getting too bogged down by anything. So it's always nice to kind of have music like his in the Rolodex.
I don't know if it's these days or this age or something, but yeah. Your stuff has got that too. I really enjoy what you're doing. Lots of ambient, but also like some cool textures. Nature seems to be like a big part of what you do. And I guess the background for people that might only be listening is sort of perfect. You've got a wall of modular, another wall of some synths. I see like, it looks like the Moog grandmother, or maybe it's the matriarch even.
Yeah, matriarch.
Yeah. But then you've got a plant, which looks a lot like, I don't know if you can see the one I got, but they look like they could be, can you see that? It might be just.
No, I can't see it. But.
Yeah, they look like they could be related.
Mine is struggling to stay alive, so don't look too close. But
I think that kind of fits your sound. There's like this like electronic and this organic thing.
Yeah, for me, like, when I got into modular and like synths in general, I always kind of wanted to make sure it was a means to an end. And, I have like real world experiences. I love going out and hiking, biking, all that stuff. And the stuff that I try, like, that's what I try to represent. And, I feel like I happen to do it with, modular or synthesizers or drum machines or whatever. So I guess I try to kind of capture that synergy just by kind of like what I'm trying to represent and, what I'm using to do it.
And you started as a guitar player, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I started when I was about 13. I didn't have any real interest or exposure to music before that. Well, I was exposed to it, obviously, because like who isn't exposed to music? But, I didn't really have an interest in it until that point. And I remember the day that I like randomly said to my mom, like, oh, what if, my grandfather taught me guitar, because he was a really amazing jazz guitarist. And so the thought just popped into my head like, oh, I could do that. And I could see like the gears were turning in my mom's head. She was like, okay, this is different. Don't discourage it, but also like kind of what's going on right now. So probably the next day we walked around the corner to my grandfather's house because he lived right on the block. And I said, like, I want to learn guitar. Will you please teach me? And he basically pointed at one of his guitars and he said, okay, grab that one and you're going to learn the way I did. Take it home. I'm not teaching you anything.
Oh, wow.
So, I walked back around the corner with this guitar, probably carrying it like, scared to death. And that was my task, just figure it out, basically.
Wow. So just almost like I don't want to influence you or guide
Right.
you like in a particular direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it you can probably guess it didn't go great, at least the first time. So I spent probably like a year, kind of working my way through it and not really getting far. And I took some time away from it. It kind of became like a shameful thing. Like he'd ask me how it was going and I'd, kind of dodge the question. But it was after I actually kind of developed my own real taste in music that, I started getting into like Metallica or I don't know, like Linkin Park or whatever at the time. And I'd be listening to this music and then I'd like look over at the guitar and I was like, I wonder if I could play this. And then once I actually had a goal to like work towards instead of like the whole abstract concept of like learn this instrument, that's kind of where it all clicked. And, once you start playing like other people's music and you kind of learn what they're doing, kind of see some of the patterns, then you can kind of extrapolate it for yourself and start writing your own music.
So you weren't looking for jazz. You were looking for, sounds like harder stuff, heavier stuff.
Yeah, I think, it wasn't until high school that I joined, my high school jazz band. And then that was kind of, that was my exposure to that whole world. But up until that point, it was all kind of like self-taught, like drop D and E minor type stuff.
Yeah,
like,
nice.
Just kind of working your way through it and just mimicking what I was hearing. But once I got to jazz band, the whole, like everything kind of came together and I started seeing stuff in a really different way.
Right. I can imagine you probably had some understanding, some foundations, but then sort of, all right, well, this is what it all means, like the key to the map.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think, just like being open-minded, being a sponge and like, not going into anything with too many, I don't know, like prejudices. Like, I didn't have an opinion on jazz. I just kind of joined because all my friends were interested in it and they were joining the jazz band. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll join too, because in my high school it was cool to be in the band. So I just kind of went into it with an open mind and tried to learn everything that I could. And it turned out to be a really awesome experience. My high school teacher was like one of my, biggest influences and like best teachers and just life in general.
That's awesome. I sort of started in similar ways. I was about that age and, I've never had exposure to music as a participant. You'd hear it like, it's everywhere. But yeah, it was kind of never occurred to me that I could actually participate. And once I realized that, it was very exciting. And I got my first guitar from my grandpa too, but
Nice.
He wasn't a really guitar player. He had this, I still have it. It's like my favorite guitar. It's this old Gibson acoustic, but it's a short scale guitar. It's almost like a parlor guitar. And it was just too small for him to get his fingers on.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of took a lot of the steam out of it. I don't know if he ever really knew that he could have got a bigger one. But, I don't really
wow,
know.
this is hard.
Yeah, because on these, it's got a smaller neck than like my electric guitars, than like a Strat does. So yeah, I could see how I'd be like, I can't play this thing; it's too little.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fun to learn it and discover it kind of on your own way a little bit. I took some lessons, but just having that experience of finding it. Of course, you never know what the roads of life would be like, but looking back, I'm kind of glad I got to do that rather than maybe when I started, I sort of wished I'd played in band so I understood music a little bit. But
yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like, you can be exposed or taught whatever, but really, I think there is like an element where you have to teach yourself. Like you have to figure it out for yourself. And I think that's true for whatever you're doing, music or otherwise. Like, if you're just instructed exactly what to do, I don't know if it's going to really take in the same way. Like, you can tell your student exactly where to put their fingers and, which string to strum and when to do it. But, like, what are they ultimately doing? That's not really any different than like, like dictating or, like writing down exactly what someone's saying as they're saying it. Like, are you really taking notes? Not really. You're kind of like transcribing. So I think like you really need that personal experience of sitting there and reckoning with it and grappling with it and taking the time to figure out like, how does this work? What do I think is cool about this? And like the next step is like, what do you hear other people doing? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? What would you do differently? And then you're kind of like off to the races at that point. But I think I also never really had lessons, so I can only kind of imagine what it's like to kind of go through that process. But from what I've heard, it's a lot of kind of that experience of more being instructed exactly what to do.
Yeah, there's, I just read a book about learning and like how we learn, and they've apparently found, according to science, that when there is some struggle, you retain stuff better. And what you were saying kind of reminds me of almost like if you were tracing a picture compared to if you were trying to draw it on your own. And I think there is something to that all that processing that happens when you're trying to figure out, how is this supposed to go? But apparently there's some sort of magic level of struggle that allows you to like really learn better, and your memory is better about the things you learn. And they say that about flow too, the flow state, that you want to be at a level where you are challenged. It's not too hard for you, but sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. So I guess it kind of makes sense that learning would be like that.
Yeah. When, I sit down to actually compose something or, just write something, it's usually how I start my day. But I feel like I'm most satisfied when there's kind of like a thesis to it, where there's, if I'm starting with something that I don't quite understand, especially if you have like a new piece of gear, or, if you have a piece of gear already and, it's like, I don't really understand what that mode does. Let's sit down and figure it out today. That's kind of been my most successful way to get started and to, kind of just generate something that I think is interesting. I guess that is like the struggle, starting with something you don't understand and kind of like, it's got to be relatively bite-sized. Like I'm not going to sit there and, say, okay, I'm going to figure out how Bach wrote this concerto or whatever. I'm going to, take something that is relatively actionable. Like, I don't understand how this guitar pedal works, and just try to make something cool with it. And at that point, I think that's a really great way to kind of catalyze that process.
Yeah, it is. It's some sort of direction, because we have infinite directions to go in, and just some little thread to pull on can really make a difference. Because I get stuck a lot when I don't know what to do. And especially like I've got time and like, what am I going to do today? I don't know. And then sometimes, just that is crippling, just not knowing. But when there is like that mission, okay, I want to do that. I got to say, that's makes me think of how I was interacting with your plugins, which we haven't even mentioned yet, but you've got your own plugins, Aqeel Aadam Sounds, right? That's what you're calling the kind of company, I guess.
Yeah.
And they're really fun, and they kind of put you in this state of not completely knowing what's going to happen when I do something. And I think the graphical interface is really nice too. And it's got that like nature thing. I can, talking to you already, I get why it looks the way it does, because you've got these like really nice backgrounds that kind of pull you into it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, man. That's really great to hear, because that's kind of exactly what I was, hoping for when I'm building them. I think like one of the core tenets of my, plugin company is kind of like helping people find inspiration. Which
a good line. I wrote it down. Plugins for the curious and open-minded.
Yeah. I think it's, I personally, I don't actually use that many plugins, because I think they tend to be very utilitarian. Something like, the Sound Toys bundle, or like RC20 or something like that. Like, they're really amazing tools, obviously. Like, they're really badass, like DSP engineers. Though I think ultimately they tend to serve a precise need. Like, I'm opening Echo Boy because I want this delay, or, it tends to be that there is a precise like utility that you're going for. And for that reason, I tend not to use software that much. And I gravitated towards all the hardware stuff, because I think there is a little bit more unpredictability, and really feeling like you're kind of collaborating with this machine, as opposed to telling it exactly what to do. And I think, for those of us with kind of like a background of playing in bands, like that's a really natural space to occupy, because, you might be playing with your buddy and you can't tell them exactly what to play. You can kind of say like, oh, I've got this, this riff or this melody or whatever, like, try it out. But they're going to play it in a different way than you would play it. And, you're not going to sit there and spend 2 hours like, no, like this is the exact accent and the emphasis or whatever. So I think it's kind of the same experience where like, you're working with this piece of hardware, or, what I'm hoping to do with the plugins is like, it feels like you're interacting with this thing, and there's a bit of a push and a pull, and kind of like negotiation. Like, there's things that it can do really well. There's things that you can kind of coerce it to do if you want to take the effort. But ultimately, I think it's occupying that space where you are, you might have an idea about what you're doing in that jam session, but it turns out totally different. And I think that's okay. I think that can be really fun.
I love that aspect of making music. The kind of, I'm an explorer,
Yeah.
like I'm like getting on the boat heading into the Atlantic in the 1300s or something, and just
Yeah.
let's see what we can find past the end of this map.
Yeah.
And
I think it's funny that you mention a boat, because I think of it as like, um, if you're looking at a map, if you can't just go somewhere on a boat, you can only steer it left and right. So,
Mm.
you might see something off in the distance and you want to get there, but you might have to take this, long arc, and maybe you get there, or maybe you find something off to the other side that's more interesting.
yeah,
um, and I think that is just way more fun and engaging than saying like, just pointing on the map and saying, I want to go right there.
mm. And like
Um,
boom, there you are.
yeah, I think it's way more interesting and often more rewarding to kind of steer yourself there and see where you get,
Mm.
or how long it takes to get there, or if you get distracted or whatever.
Yeah, and kind of what I was saying before, like when there's so many choices and decisions, you don't know where to go. It can be like paralyzing.
Yeah.
So I try to come up with like a plan. I do this like with my classes and stuff. Like try to make them define the plan. Like what kind of song are you trying to make? What's the occasion? Why would someone listen to it? Just as much as you can, but then not worry what happens. So pick a target and make it as clear as you can. It might be kind of fuzzy and blurry. Then just shoot the arrow. And it's not about hitting the target necessarily. Just now you're going for something. And then all of these interesting things can happen along the way. I think you get that with like hardware gear a lot more. So even if it's an EQ on like a mixing board, they might only be like certain numbers. You might get like 200 hertz, 1K, 5K, and then that's, maybe one more. So you're turning the knob, it's like around 1K, a little past it. But when you're in the computer, it's like, I'm going to 1,274 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so precise, and it can take some of that exploration out of it, I think, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of, software tools are very like completionist. Like they have every single feature you could probably want. Like if it's an EQ, it's like make as many bands as you want. You can have 4,000. But on like a mixing board, it's maybe 4, maybe 5. And I think like, it's even more limited in the realm of like a guitar pedal, or like a Eurorack module. It's like, there's only so many knobs. If we put double the number of knobs, it would be double the price and nobody would buy it. So I think it's a really cool medium where, you can't do everything. And I think that's okay. Like you can do a lot of things, and you can kind of like work with that. I think it's really interesting to kind of like, reason with what you have. Like, I want to do XYZ. I can't do that exactly, or I don't have one particular tool that will let me do that. But, if I combine this and grab that and kind of use them together in this way I hadn't thought of before, like all of a sudden, I'm 95% of the way that to what I was trying to do. And I've got something, much more interesting. Like you've probably got all these cool like byproducts, or you've thought of a new way to use these things that you could, use in the next jam and the next jam and the next jam. And you're just like making these connections in a way that I feel like is a little less, rewarding when you're just telling this thing exactly what to do. I think it's just more fun to to do that exploring and find a way there that you didn't know before.
Yeah, and When there's only a few knobs and controls, you're more likely to twist them and turn them.
Yeah.
Play around.
Yeah.
You did
Absolutely.
a really cool thing. I think it's in Ridgewalk, which that's the looper, if I'm not confusing them, right?
So Ridgewalk is like it's kind of like a sound on sound looper that also
yeah.
runs into a granular engine.
Okay. Yeah, as I'm saying,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if looper is the best way to put it, but
I'm still working on the marketing.
But you did it in a really cool way where not everything gets through. There's a threshold control. So that means I can play quiet and doesn't get involved in all this looping granular stuff. Then I can dig in a little bit and then it comes through. But I love the way you decided to do this kind of circle, that the volume is represented by the circle that gets bigger when it's louder and smaller when it's quiet. And then you make the circle for the threshold. I mean, you could have done a very precise, VU meter, and we could have seen the numbers and how many decibels we have to play at. But something about that circle, and it does read out the numbers, but it's inviting. And it's like, no, I wanted to get this much of the circle. And it got me playing in a way that I was trying to interact with the plugin a little bit more. And sometimes you lose that inside the computer with some of the digital stuff that's not responsive to envelopes and volume levels and stuff. So that was a fun approach that it brought back. And it reminds me of this trick I used to like to do before I had a computer at all to record in. With vocals, I would set up like a condenser mic to sing into. That was kind of the main mic. And then I'd put a dynamic mic about arm's length away. And that would be going into a delay. And it would only really be audible when I sang louder. So kind of certain words would bust through and hit the delay. And now you can certainly program that and set up effects chains and stuff and be really precise. But I always kind of loved that I didn't always know what I was going to get. I didn't know if the words were going to go through until it was recorded. And then that's what you got. And you just stuck with it. And I just think that what you're doing invites that kind of experimentation, exploration. And it's a great tagline, really, the open-minded, curious way of looking at it, because it forces you to just see what happens when I play with it and interact with it. And because of that, a lot of the times when I've been trying to learn these plugins of yours, I just get kind of lost in making the music. So that mission of I'm going to learn this thing, which is a lot of times for me the secondary mission anyway. I want to make music. So when I'm playing with your stuff, I find myself kind of throwing the learn it out the window and just be like, oh, this sounds cool.
Yeah, man. No, that's awesome to hear. I think there's, when we have such cool tools out there, I think there can be a tendency to feel like you have to learn every nook and cranny of it. And I've never been that way as a musician. I feel like every single thing in this room I understand maybe 10% of, but I know how to access that 10% and use it in a way that I like, and that makes results that I'm happy with. And I tried to kind of do that with the plugins as well, where it's like, there's a little something for everyone. But if, you just open it up and just look at what's on the front panel and never even dig into the deeper settings or whatever, that's totally cool. The goal is that you get lost in it and you're not thinking about it. And maybe one day, down the line, you're like, oh, I don't understand what this setting does, or, oh, I just found out about this, esoteric setting in the settings menu or whatever. That kind of opens up a whole new world. But I think the real goal is that experience of literally just making music. And it's really cool to hear about you using it with guitar as well. Because, obviously being software, I imagine it's mostly used with stuff that's also in the box. But I really tried to tune these things to work for, kind of, I guess, like sounds and like soft synths and stuff that have a little bit less dynamic range. They're a bit more like, dialed in, or, live performance. I tried to kind of make sure that, both groups would be satisfied and have fun with it.
Mm. I have to imagine making a plugin is in a way a little bit like arranging a song nowadays, because we can make infinite tracks. I can have every sound ever come in.
Yeah.
And you could certainly put more control. I mean, you did a lot with graphics. You left a lot of room for that, just for the visual experience. How did you decide what to bring in and what to leave out? Because I'm guessing there's a lot of stuff happening that you could have gave parameters for.
Yeah.
But maybe decided, no, I'm not going to do that. Let's keep it cleaner. How did you go about that?
Yeah, I think, I think every product kind of has a core idea or thesis to it. And everything really needs to serve that. I think that kind of like core aspect of the plugin is really what's unique about it. It doesn't even have to be a plugin. It could be anything. Guitar pedal or Eurorack module or whatever. But I think there's a core idea of like, why should this exist? What is unique about this? Why would I bother building this as opposed to using something that's already out there and some other talented person already built? So I think, I definitely start from there, and kind of think about like, okay, what is this thing? What is this abstract idea? What is cool about this? And from there, I kind of expand on it. So like, for example, with Ridgewalk, the core idea is basically like this granular algorithm that you can kind of, direct in a particular way. Like you can kind of scan through the buffer from forward to backward. You can scan through it from backward to forward. You can scan through it randomly, whatever. That's something that I use in my music all the time. Like, just building a patch like that on the Eurorack. So I started from that idea. And then I started thinking about like, okay, what enhances that? So that's where the whole like sound on sound looper came into play, because I thought it would be cool. Like, hey, how do you refresh this buffer? How do you add to it? And from there, that became like a whole like layered history, like looper thing that's going on. And, those kind of leaps from the original idea, I think are what really kind of make it so interesting. But to answer your question, I think like the stuff that you leave out, I tend to, I really try to respect like the environment that these plugins are being used in. So, in a DAW, like, you've got a million EQs or reverbs, delays. Everybody's got a reverb plugin they love, a delay plugin they love, whatever. So I felt like I didn't really need to reinvent the wheel in that respect so much. I didn't feel much, I guess I would say, like responsibility to include, every single possible nice to have, because you're running in this environment that's like so super powered, like you can do anything in it. And that makes it a little easier for me. I can kind of like pare things down and keep them relatively simple. And I try to just keep it, as atomic as possible while also being unique and something that people would want to use. And I think like just in testing, or kind of once you've got like a an alpha build of something, that's where you can kind of like start using the thing and being like, oh, this is cool. But like, what would put this over the top and make it amazing would be, such and such. And once you get like friends playing with it and stuff, that's where you kind of like go from there. But I would say like in general, I operate with a very like conservative mindset where like I'm usually withholding ideas and features as opposed to like throwing everything in there. And I think that really helps like solidify the idea of like, what is this thing? Why would I use this?
Mm. Yeah, good point. Because you could have had like a whole page of effects, like
Right.
chorus, reverb, flanger.
Yeah.
And a lot of things tend to do that. But I don't ever really find myself gravitating towards those effects. I usually just bring in the reverb I want, or another chorus or something else that I've already got. And it allows you to focus a bit on what you're offering in that nice small area where I can see things and it's nothing too overwhelming.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It's always just that like kind of negotiation between, what do I think is cool about this, and why would people want to use this? And I think my task is mostly to convince people that it's interesting and package it in a way that feels usable and natural, as opposed to adding every bell and whistle I can think of that would, maybe draw people into something that they don't understand as much. Because you totally could like say, oh, it's got 20 built-in effects, like all this crazy stuff. And I think that kind of stuff, like, is flashy and works from a marketing perspective. But I want people to actually use this stuff and enjoy it. And I want it to help them make music. And, I would rather people not buy it than they buy it and it just sits there and they never use it and they feel disappointed about that.
Yeah, right. You could have a couple extra bullet points in the features. I would say includes all of these effects. But it is nice. I do appreciate that a lot more and more these days. It's something that kind of does its job. And it's the thing I'll go to when I want that, and not trying to do everything all the time.
Yeah. It's a very, I mean, coming from my like background with Eurorack, modular, like everything in that format is so stripped down. The original format is literally like you're patching the oscillator into the filter, into the VCA, whatever. But it's a more like mature environment now, but it's still very common for like, a delay is just a delay. It doesn't have any reverb built in. Oftentimes it doesn't have any kind of like tape effect or warble, because you can add that with an LFO. And I think that's kind of like where the background that I'm coming from is like, there's so many things out there that just do their job so well already. Like, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's kind of, do something cool with the sum of our parts here.
How long have you been into the modular experience?
So I started with modular in college. I had this really awesome professor who kind of like straddled the music and computer science department. For context, I was a computer science major, and I was one credit short of a music minor, which is still a little sad. But I had this really awesome professor. His name is Jeff Snyder, and he has a company that's called Snyder Phonics, where he builds like just some really awesome stuff. Like he's been building like he has an electronic version of a bass and a lap steel guitar where it's like totally like you play it, but it's like totally synthesized.
Hmm.
But anyway, he had a course that was just called like, I don't know, like studio techniques or something like that, where we started so basic. We started at like, this is a cable and this is how you wrap it. Um,
Which is a
to,
valuable.
yeah,
You do that almost every day.
yeah. And then we got into like, this is a DAW. This is how it records sound, you know, samples, sample rate, buffers, whatever. And kind of like, you know, to me, the like holy grail of that class was that he had put together like a pretty robust Eurorack system. I don't know how he convinced the department that that was worth the money, but there was like this, you know, pretty substantial like Eurorack system in the classroom, and you know, one of the assignments was like you had to book time to come into the space, and the task was to like record a song with the modular, and how you did that was completely up to you. You could live track something, do it all in one take. You could sample off like different parts of it and, you know, chop that up in the DAW. You know, it's just totally up to you. And I think that experience of like booking like 2 hours, you know, at like 11 p.m. on a Tuesday or whatever, and just sitting with this thing and being like, what the hell is this? What am I going to do with this? How do I work with this? That just ended up being a really cool experience. Because at first I had no idea what I was doing, but you know, going back to what we were saying before, like forcing yourself to sit down with it and kind of grapple with it and figure out what you're going to do, like what you want to do and how do you do it. That was just like a really meaningful experience for me. And I think, you know, I think it's just so cool to like in a classroom setting like that, you know, you kind of get the academic side of stuff, like this is an oscillator, this is a filter, this is what it's doing. But then to actually go in there and sit down with this thing and being like, whoa, if I just like listen to the oscillator itself, it sounds crazy. But then once I put it into the filter, I actually understand what it's doing. And just kind of like having that experience really like solidified like kind of the usefulness of the format, and it ended up just really clicking for me. So once I graduated college and got a job, it was a goal of mine to like set up a home studio. And modular, like I knew modular was going to be a part of that.
That's cool that you got the time to get the hands-on experience, you know, just tweak and play with it. And
yeah,
because I think you need that. You kind of need that with everything, really, but
yeah,
something like that to really get why we would want it, why we want to use it, go through all that trouble.
Yeah, and even, I mean, it's just so different than any other way you would make music. Like I remember like sitting there, like just staring at this thing and thinking about like the oscillators just make noise forever, whether or not you're listening to them. And like, if you're someone who's like coming from like a guitar background or a piano background or whatever, it's like this thing only makes sound when you actually like hit it. But this thing is sitting there making sound, and it's like my choice whether or not to listen to it or to use it for, you know, whatever other reason I want to use it for. So it's really like it's like an orchestra at your fingertips if you want to use it that way. You know, everything's just doing its job and it's ready, you know, ready and willing, like whatever whatever you want to do with it. Um, so as somebody who had kind of come from a band background and kind of like a songwriter background, it was really enticing because it's like, oh, this is a band that I don't have to convince. Like I don't have to convince them that this song is cool. Like they'll just do it. So I think it's a great platform for like former control freaks and band leaders.
Right. Yeah, the whole DAW in general is nice for that.
Yeah, it is funny how many like modular folks that I know, like they have basically we all have the same background. It's like, yeah, I used to play guitar in bands, and then for whatever reason, this like format really appealed to me, and I just ran with it ever since. And I think we're maybe the folks that don't work well with others.
Yeah, in a way, I think it brought me full circle that, or maybe 180, that having full control over everything and being able to do everything has now made me enjoy other people's input a lot more.
Yeah.
Like I don't even want to think about what the bass is going to do. Just, come up with something.
Yeah.
Whatever you come up with, and we'll react to that. We'll work on it.
Mm-hmm.
I get a big kick out of that now. It's almost as if I've programmed the DAW to do something random, like in the key of the song. And then, all right, now what will I do? How will I complement that? Instead of trying to control it. No, play this because I want to play this.
Yeah, I think, I don't get the experience of playing with people very much, unfortunately. But, I mean, it's really cool when it does happen. It's just rare for a number of reasons. But I really love the experience of going to a show and just kind of like turning off the part of your brain that's like, what would I do? How would I have played that? What would I have done after that transition? Like, it doesn't matter. Just let it like wash over you and really listen and appreciate what someone else is doing, and just kind of chill. You don't have to contribute to everything. So I really enjoy that process. That's probably like the most analogous for me, is just that kind of intentional listening and appreciating what somebody else's brain and fingers thought would be cool in that moment.
Yeah, right. Just to take it in and soak it up and see where it goes, instead of trying to, that's kind of in a way like the critic too, I think.
Mm-hmm.
When you think that way too much, then when you're making stuff, that voice is still very loud. Maybe you shouldn't have done that. Maybe there's a better way. And so much these days, I'm really appreciating letting things happen and going with what happens and not questioning it as much. I kind of noticed that, at least in some of the videos I've seen of you performing, that it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you do this I don't know if it's improvisational, but in a more kind of like a long flow, and not so much going back and fixing and changing things, but more letting things kind of grow naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would say like those performances are really based around like giving yourself levers to pull. Like a lot of times I'll set up like, okay, here's like 3 kind of ambient atmospheres or whatever, and maybe like a melody to go with each one, and then from there you're just kind of like segueing through it how it feels natural. And the improvisation comes from like, how long do I sit on this one particular part? Like, when do I feel inclined to kind of introduce a variation? Or maybe the machine just did something cool and I decide to play off of it. It's kind of how I've recorded albums as well, especially my last album. I think at the heart of kind of each of the pieces was really like a core recording that just kind of went all the way through. And, semi-generative, manually performed. But I think, a lot of the other stuff that happens in the piece kind of branches off of that, where, I'm kind of like listening to what what the machine and I made, this like kind of bedrock for a track, and I'm like, oh, the filter kind of opened in a cool way there. Like maybe this should be a part where we amp everything up. Like maybe that's where like we bring in the hook or whatever. So I try to I always try to have a combination of, what's performative and what's kind of like scripted, or kind of like, I don't know, a scripted performance or performed script.
Well, the setup, right? Like you're not, I mean, I see, like I'm looking at what you have right now, and there are a lot of wires connected, a lot of cables going to different places. It's not like you're starting with nothing and do like the signal generators coming out.
Yeah.
And then, so I think that's like true about performance with the laptop and all. A lot of people think that once you have the laptop, you kind of just open it and hit play and the song goes. But you're basically building your instrument inside there if you're using MIDI controllers and mapping them and coming up with songs and parts. There's a lot of prep work that goes into that. So
yeah, absolutely.
I could see how you must need to do that, especially when you have all kinds of choices and modules to work with.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's very ephemeral as well. Like you kind of got to hit record, or especially with like a patch or whatever, like if I came back to the same thing tomorrow and turned everything off and turned it on the next day, like who knows what's going to happen.
Just things are in a different relationship to each other, right?
Yeah, tuning, or some stuff like kind of dumps like all of its like audio buffers, like when the power cycles. So there's only so much you can really like make sure happens. So you have to do it in the moment, to a certain extent, which is I think powerful. I mean, that's kind of when everything is most fresh as well.
Yeah. Do you find it hard to unplug things? Like say like what you have right now, right? Is it like, I can't touch anything because I've got this thing going, or
no, yeah, not at all. I mean, I start every jam by like unplugging basically everything.
Right. Going fresh.
Yeah, it's like, it's just, I don't know. I find that I can't really go into anything with, like something's being prescribed or it's not really going to work. I just kind of have to start completely fresh or I'm not going to do anything.
There must be a point in the process where you realize I have to record or I have to turn this into something. And I think that's true even when you're writing songs, when you're playing with other people. There's a point where you have to decide like, oh, this is going to be the thing we're working on right now. Do you have any ways of knowing? Do you just let the recording run and just go? Or do you have any techniques you like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd call it a technique, but I feel like I try not to lose sight of the ultimate goal, which is making something musical, like making music. And for whatever I'm exploring, like if I've made a cool noise bed or kind of like abstract rhythm or whatever, I try to always take it, to the step past like, this is cool. And I try to take it to the next step, which is like, this is a really cool aspect of this song. And I think of it like I'm really into impressionist painting, for example. And if you look at a lot of these paintings, like if you were to look at a painting of a landscape or a painting of a pond or something, if you just cropped the painting to be the sky or the reflections in the water, it would, like, you would look at this and you'd be like, this is completely abstract. It's meaningless, whatever. Like, I don't, like, it's cool, but I don't know what I'm getting from this. But once you get the full picture, and maybe there's a landscape or a cabin or trees or whatever, all of a sudden you're like, wow, that is a really interesting way to paint a sky or to paint the reflections in the water. And I feel like it's, obviously the painter decided like what is an interesting way to paint the sky, but they didn't stop there. They took it a step further and contextualized it. So I would say that's what I try to do in my music. I try to come up with something unique and interesting. Maybe it's like a generative atmosphere or kind of a really interesting sound source or whatever. And I try to place that or build like a song or composition around that. And that's usually when I know that it's time to record. Once I feel like I've properly contextualized that thing and kind of succeeded in making music. Obviously, like, everyone's definition of music is different, and like a really awesome noise bed to one person could just be a track, upload to Spotify. But for me personally, I really appreciate when there's a bit of like, there's something abstract and it's working with or maybe against, something a bit more colloquial, like chord changes or, a recognizable drum beat or a catchy melody or whatever.
That's a cool comparison because, like if it's the sky doesn't really look like the sky until you have some earth in there or even some clouds or planets or whatever you want to put in there.
Yeah.
There's a context. But as you also said, like if you did crop in on that, someone might look at that and be like, oh, this is like really cool. Abstract, I'm going to do my own interpretation. But to bring it in with some of the more familiar, and I've seen you playing some guitar in there, for instance, that kind of grounds it a little bit. And we can sort of, that's almost like the cabin you said, it's recognizable more so, or the beat that comes in.
Yeah, it's kind of like the age-old question of like keeping something instrumental or adding vocals and even having, like 2 lines of vocals or something can just make something feel so human. And I mean, my stuff is instrumental, but I try to make sure that there's something that was performed in there, that you can kind of like recognize as like, oh yeah, like a human made this.
I like those touches a lot, actually. And I teach a sampling class for Berkeley online, and some of it's like pretty abstract and some of it is like making sounds with things you found in the kitchen or wherever in your house. And I almost always find when something human comes in, a voice, even if it's talking or chatter or breathing, it just takes it to another level. And not to say like it's anything less without it, but I do really enjoy that element, that something alive was there. not just all these static things. And it makes the static things feel more alive on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite beats that I made with some friends, like, I don't know, probably a decade ago. We all just like got together, and I think we like recorded, like, I forget, it was like somebody had like a xylophone or glockenspiel or whatever, and like we just like recorded a melody off of it, but like nobody shut up. So there's like all of these like there's chatter in the background and like people laughing, and it just like added like such a vibe to it. And I've heard, like, you know, some people, like, when they're recording like modular, like synth stuff, like they'll have like a room mic or like a god mic going, just to kind of like capture like
god mic,
just to like capture what you were hearing like in the space, you know. Because like, I mean, in a technical sense, like maybe like something is really like resonating in the space, and like there's a real power to like this one particular like bass note that, you know, is integral to whatever you're producing. Or maybe there's just stuff going on. I mean, in this room that I'm in, like when I write music in the morning, there's birds and you know, insects and all kinds of stuff that's kind of going on like right outside the window. And a lot of times that kind of like can catalyze what I'm doing. Like I'm thinking like, oh, what should this melody be? And then like a bird kind of chimes in, and I'm like, yeah, B flat sounds good here.
Thanks, buddy.
So it would be cool to kind of incorporate that sort of thing sometimes.
I've become very loose about quiet while I'm recording, or even like windows being open or things like that. I love when that stuff gets in. I was recording some stuff with my band, and I was doing vocals, background vocals, and I had all the windows and doors open. I was like, okay, cool. Let's see what happens. And there's a spaciousness that it brings to it. And sometimes, like you said, like, and that's a really great example, that like the room, it has a sound. And I know in my room, depending where I stand, it totally changes everything.
Yeah.
So to have a mic that's capturing what it felt like to hear it, because sometimes when it goes directly in to the digital recorder, something gets lost in translation.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're using like an amp simulator or something, it doesn't, you know, doesn't really sound the same as actually like being in a space and having that kerfuffle going around.
Yeah, just the madness of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. We should mention Waymaker, the new one.
Yeah.
How do you explain that? Because this is, okay, like it's a sequencer, but that's not fair. It's like calling the other one a looper, I guess.
Yeah. So I call it it's a modular sequencer. And I think it's modular in three ways, if you'll bear with me. One is that it's super inspired by Eurorack. It's not really inspired by a particular module or anything, but just the things that are available to you in Eurorack, where you can, have one sequence that is maybe like, the pitches are summed with another sequencer. So one sequence is transposing another, or you could have a rhythmic sequence, which is actually like clocking or progressing another sequencer. So, you can take the basic idea of, play this pitch on step one and play this pitch on step two. And you can start to play around with, when do you actually play those steps? When do you step through the sequencer? You could put some probability between those things. So you have a rhythm, but it's only actually firing 50% of the time and actually progressing you through that melody. So all of a sudden you've got like a melody that's repeating, but it's like, when does it repeat? I don't know.
Mm.
So these are kind of like ideas that I've always like really appreciated in Eurorack, where you can just kind of take something simple and kind of manipulate it and kind of combine it with other things that are relatively simple and get something more complex out of it and more interesting. So it's inspired by modular. It actually functions in a modular way. So I think it has 10 different sequencers and utilities in there, which are each relatively simple. There's like a basic step sequencer. There's like a probabilistic sequencer, which is kind of like, what's the probability of each note in the scale happening. There's like a morphing sequencer, which like randomly changes every loop, which is fun. And you are free to kind of take these simple parts and create a customizable chain of sequencers that are kind of interacting with each other, that are, manipulating the output of one another, or one of them is, progressing another one through its steps. So it's a totally customizable environment where you're combining kind of whatever you want, basically.
Mm.
And then the last way that it's modular is that it can interact with my other plugins. So my other plugins right now are basically two flavors of loopers, where one of them is you can stack up to 5 loops at once, and the other one is kind of like like we said, is a looper running through a granular algorithm. And Waymaker can connect directly to those other plugins and kind of manipulate their pitches. So you can sequence the pitch of each of the loopers, or you can, make each grain in Ridgewalk have like a percentage chance of going up an octave, and just a lot of fun stuff like that. So I'm trying to build up a unique ecosystem that's kind of similar to something that you'd have in Eurorack, where it's like, I've got something basic here, like this is a delay. It's got a delay time, and it's got a feedback control. But if you pair it with something else, like, now you're sequencing the delay time or modulating it with an LFO or whatever, like all of a sudden it becomes like a totally different thing. Like that's how you make a chorus or like a phaser or a flanger or whatever. It's born out of just taking a delay and doing stuff with it. So I tried to kind of take that ethos from Eurorack, where, oftentimes you're like messing around with something. You're like, this is cool. What if I took it one step further? Then you can load up Waymaker now and take it one step further if you want.
Mm. It's pretty cool that they can communicate with each other like that and connect. And then you've got already, with the other guys that you already have, like there's so much variety in what they do. And now there's a lot of places you can go. And it's kind of stuff, I think, where a very little bit goes a long way. So if you tried to do all that stuff, it'd probably be very chaotic, but
yeah,
a couple subtle things. And then next thing you know, you might just have a really short loop or melody that is constantly evolving and growing and morphing.
Yeah. And that's really the goal. I think, going back to the idea of like catalyzing inspiration, I feel like, with Waymaker, I feel the most kind of satisfied with that, because like coming up with a melody is such an integral and like early part of songwriting usually. Um, maybe you have some chords, maybe you have like an atmosphere, you don't really know what to do with it. Um, I mean, I love just like taking one of these Eurorack sequencers and like, I don't know what it's doing, but I'm going to patch it up to a sound and see what happens. And from that point, like, once you hear anything, then you can kind of iterate on it and try to steer it in a way that kind of fits what you would do with it. But just starting from scratch, like if you just sat me down on the piano, I don't know if I'd come up with anything very good. So sometimes you need a little push, and I think I've actually like been using Waymaker a ton in my own music, which is usually a good sign. If I'm like not so stressed out by the idea of like looking at this thing by the time I've released it.
Right.
It's usually a good thing. But it's I definitely feel proud of how much in my experience and from the feedback I've gotten, like just the inspiration it can help people find, which has been really awesome to hear.
Yeah, that's got to be a really cool part of it. Just to,
yeah,
I love that whenever I make sound packs or something and people make music, I'm just like, what? You did that with those? Like, it's always kind of blows my mind. Like, wow, how'd you do that?
Yeah, and you're probably hearing it in like a context you never would have like imagined it. Like, oh, like you're using like, I don't know, like my electric piano pack, and you're like in your metal song or something.
Yeah, sometimes just
your harsh noise project.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised how often I can't tell and I don't recognize it.
Oh
When
wow!
people tell me, I'm like, where is it? Like, oh, it's that thing. Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's the same for me. Where I mean, people see their own value in something. Really, it's like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. People will buy something because it appeals to them to make X kind of music, and that's not something I would have ever thought to do with it. And that's just really cool. Like the idea that somebody else thought it was cool enough to kind of extend the usage in that way. And sometimes that means I get a very valid feature request for something I'd never considered because I don't work in a certain way. But that just makes the end result even stronger, I think.
Right. It's really cool stuff, and it seems like you're kind of cranking them out at a pretty good pace.
Yeah, this is
how long have you been? Just a couple of years, right?
Yeah, I think Weeping Wall, which is my first plugin. I think that came out in December 2023. And that took me about maybe 8 months to kind of put together. And I think Ridgewalk came out the summer after that. And now Waymaker has been about a little less than a year since Ridgewalk. But it's getting faster. Like the development process is getting more efficient, which is good, just as I learn more things. And kind of, can drill down to the core idea of what I'm trying to build a little bit more efficiently. And also just like building things that are way more complex. I think Waymaker it's got like double the lines of code of Ridgewalk and triple the lines of code of Weeping Wall, but I managed to put it together in around the same time frame. So, just it's cool to, see yourself get to a point where you can do something more ambitious. And, just be able to take a crazy idea and a crazier idea and a even crazier idea and kind of turn them into something that, exists and people think is cool sometimes. But yeah, there's plenty more in the pipeline as well. I know that there are at least like 4 things I want to build, and for now it's going strong enough that I think I'll be able to do that, which is awesome. Because when I released Weeping Wall, I was kind of like, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see if anyone cares about this or likes it or whatever. And it's cool that almost 2 years later, I'm still doing it. So, it's just all about keeping it going as long as you can, really.
Well, they have a distinct vibe and feel to them. And now that there's 3, there's some connective tissue between them that they feel like the same company, and they have a look. And I guess like sounds like it shouldn't matter, but it does matter. I want to look at something nice, and I find like the look you have for these to be inspiring, and it's cool. And when I play with Ridgewalk, I want to watch my audio come up, and I want to watch those little playhead bumps. I don't even know what to call them, but I want to watch them go across it and hear what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And changing the pitch and watching the mountains get taller and smaller.
Yeah.
Like those are just fun touches that I guess you probably could just give us sliders and numbers, probably, right? And we could, have drop down menus, and it would be technically similar, but there's something, it takes you someplace. I think it really does. It brings you into a mood.
Yeah. I think I mean the ability to have robust visuals is something that's kind of unique to plugins. On like
so
a guitar
often they
pedal.
default to like knobs and faders, like the physical thing that they're representing, and knobs and faders are great in the real world, but they're weird with a mouse. Trying to turn a knob, I don't know if I should go up or sideways, or it gets weird when you get past a certain point.
Exactly. It's like, I get that these things are inspired by something that exists in the real world, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like skeuomorphic. Like on a guitar pedal, it's like at best you have like a couple LEDs, and it's like, oh, if it's blinking faster, it's in this mode, and if it's blue, it means it's reversed or whatever. Like, just like stuff you have to memorize. So back to the question of like, why should this thing exist? I think that the visuals and kind of making something engaging and fun and exciting, like that's kind of a huge advantage that software can have, which, as you just pointed out, like is usually a little underrepresented and underexplored. So, I try to just keep it interesting, and, selfishly, I try to create something that, advertises itself. Like people, if they're uploading like a screen recording or whatever of whatever they're working on, like I want it to be something that you don't want to close the window, like something that you want to have like sitting on the screen. But at the same time, like I want it to be something you don't want to close anyway. Like, I want it to be something that's almost like a like in Ridgewalk's case, it's like a sort of a visualizer
Yeah.
that you could just leave running as long as you want.
Yeah. I kind of want to see it moving around.
Yeah.
There are definitely plugins like that that I think people, if they're making their little clips for their reels or whatever, that they leave open because they look cool. They're
Yeah.
they're pleasing to look at, but maybe some of the more simple utilitarian kind of deals, like no one wants to look at that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is probably correlated with how inspirational the tool is. If I'm, I don't know, configuring, like I want a dotted eighth note delay, I only have to look at a plugin for 20 seconds to do that.
Mm.
So I don't know if I'm getting much inspiration out of that. But if it's something that I feel like, I'm forced to sit there and watch it a little bit, maybe that kind of entices you to fiddle with some settings, or you just stumble upon something that you weren't really expecting before. So I do think like the aesthetics can be a really big factor in how just how fun something is to use, and like makes you come back to it, whether it's in like that session or the next session or whatever.
I enjoy doing that from time to time when I'm making instruments or effects to like name the macros something like Dream Sparkle instead of, filter granular delay or,
Yeah.
something so technical that feels like you're doing science more than music, where
Yeah.
you're in this more creative. That's one thing I love about like the OP1. I've always loved that about that. It's, you're manipulating these graphics. You don't even know what the knobs are doing half the time. They don't even tell you.
Yeah.
So you're just listening and watching the thing change, and it makes you want to play around with it.
Yeah. There's definitely a sweet spot to it. It's like, I mean, one of the last things I usually do is kind of nail down the terminology of everything in the UI. And, I think it's always kind of a question of how technical to get. And so, like, for example, on Ridgewalk, like there's a setting called blur, and that's, it's kind of how smooth the grains are, like how much attack and release do they have. But then it also starts to introduce a reverb as well if you kind of push it to the more extreme settings. And that could totally be labeled like, I don't know, like grain smoothness and reverb. But I think it's like I feel like that's an example of like kind of, I feel happy with nailing that combination of like, it's a little abstract, but you can also figure it out. Like if I told you like this is going to blur the sound, like you can kind of figure out what that probably means.
I can.
And from there, you're like using your ears.
Visualize that sound in my head.
Yep.
Visualize isn't the right word. Is there a word for imagining sound? Like what visualize is imagining?
I don't know.
Maybe it's just something. But yeah, I get that. And I love that control, by the way. That's kind of a magic.
Yeah, thank you.
Control right there, the blur.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an example of like something I wanted to make sure was on the front panel for like, if you don't want to think about it too much, like just, this is like the one knob ambient control, basically.
I think if you would have named it the more technical names, in this case, I understand blur better, what that's going to do to the sound better than I would if you said, oh, we're going to change the attack and release of the grains. And that would be like, what does that mean? What's that going to do? Blur,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. And I think it's like it goes both directions where if, there's a control and you can't boil it down to a simple term like that, like maybe it shouldn't be one control. Maybe it's doing too much. Um,
Hmm.
it's kind of like a signal in some ways. Um, I'm always like, I wear I wear a lot of hats. And,
Yeah.
there's kind of like the original version of me that's like dreaming up this idea, and then there's like the engineer who's building it, and
Hmm.
the product manager who's kind of figuring out like what needs to even be in there at all, and the marketing guy.
Yeah.
But when sometimes when you're doing that marketing stuff or thinking about like, okay, how am I going to actually get people to understand this? Like, if I can't figure out a way to get people to understand it, then maybe it's not understandable enough. It's not digestible.
Hmm.
So it's time to, go back to the drawing board a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. I could see how they inform each other a bit, but it's also switching gears.
Yeah.
It's like that with everything we do, I guess, right? These days, a lot of the jobs of the music maker was many jobs, many different
Hmm.
people, engineer, producer,
Yeah.
you know, talent. Never
Yeah.
gonna find that part in my repertoire. The talent.
Well, it's I mean, a lot of times it feels like the actual um the specialization and like the expert aspect of those individual roles can be lost as we're all kind of like trying to do, you know, 65% of
Mm,
what used to be an entire job.
right.
Um, it's it's kind of it's a gift and a curse. I think it's awesome that you could, you know, record a song and mix it and master it and release it and market it and
Mm,
do all the things that musicians have to do these days. Um, but it's also, it's really nice when you get to kind of witness like a master at work. Um, like with my music, it's always been mastered by someone else. And I think that's just a really cool and important part of the process to like send it off, and a human being is working on this. And they send it back, it sounds awesome. Like
mm,
that's a great part of the process. And I think I would be sad if the mastering step were annoying and something that I had to really figure out myself. So I think it's nice when we still get the rare opportunity to kind of you know let the specialists and the masters shine.
mm. Yeah, we get to do it, but it is nice when, especially when it comes back like it's almost like magic. Wow, how'd you do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of the same thing with the plugin design where, um, I mean, I'm really doing everything from the product design to the implementation to the UI and the visuals and the graphics and stuff. Um, and I think, in some cases, like it's really, it would probably be beneficial to involve someone else. Um, I'm especially like with testing and stuff like that. That's when all kinds of ideas
Mm,
that I'd never even like conceived of like start popping up. Um, but I think I like when I was just starting out, I was kind of like just scrappy, trying to do everything that I can myself, and I still try to do that. But it's getting to the point where I feel like I can involve other people as well, which is really nice.
mm. Awesome stuff, man. I really like what you're doing and a lot of fun to play around with. And I've been lost in these worlds that I've created with your stuff quite a bit lately. So
Appreciate
thanks for bringing it into existence and sharing it with the world.
it. Yeah. I mean, thanks for thinking it's cool.
That's the easy part. You did a great job.
Yeah.
We can send people to AqeelAadamSound.com, and I'll put the links in the show notes. You have one of those unusual situations where there's no U after the Q in your name. AQEELAADAM sound.com for anyone just listening. But yeah, I'll put it in the show notes for people to find.
Thanks.
And I wish you continued luck and hope that, Waymaker's a big hit and people get onto it. I'll be playing around with it some more, trying to figure it out, and also just let it do its thing and surprise me. I like that. Yeah. These devices all kind of have that, where there's an element of surprise, it seems like, around every corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the goal. I don't know, probably 20% surprise, 80% feeling like you know what you're doing.
That's cool.
I don't know what the right ratio is.
That's a good spot to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool,
but yeah, no, I really appreciate you, checking them out. And, obviously, like someone like you who I'm sure there's so much stuff that comes across your desk and you've got so much experience. Like, I really appreciate you kind of taking the time with them and kind of seeing the value in them.
Thanks. So they stand out. They really do. You're doing something special. And
thank you.
It's pretty awesome that this is all coming out of your mind and into reality.
It's sometimes it comes out of the mind too much. I need to I'm like, I need to go play video games for 10 hours straight.
Yeah, it's always good to kind of cleanse the palate a little.
Yeah.
Come back fresh.
Absolutely. Because I mean, it's funny, like as soon as you start doing something you love, you almost have to hold yourself back sometimes.
Mm. Right. Yeah, you gotta keep making it. You probably want to just play with it.
Yeah. I mean, I like to kind of juggle the Waymakers out there, like what are the follow-up updates I want to do for it, and then there's the stuff that I'm building right this second, and then there's the stuff that I'm dreaming off on the horizon. So you can kind of, there's always something to do, and it's kind of nice to be able to pick and choose what feels most inspiring and effective in that moment. And that's the beauty of working for yourself, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, we're all benefiting from it.
Appreciate it.
Cool. So yeah, everyone listening, check it out. AqeelAadamSound.com, Ridgewalk, Waymaker, and Weeping Wall. All unique in their own right, and they play nice together too.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.